an environment away from nature is often a very stressful environment. So we've got this ideal environment and we've got this new environment, and that crescent bit, this bit around here, the dark blue bit, is actually the area of what's called mismatch. That's the dangerous area where we have no nature in our life at all. It's all about the new way that we're looking at in the cities where there's no nature. But there's an opportunity, because we can't go back to where being a hunter-gatherer, we can't go back to having no human interference at all, or no housing or anything like that, because we wouldn't survive very well. But there is a bit in the middle, and that's where the opportunity, where we merge and we manage to keep together both nature and the urban environment, and we melt the two together. And that's where we have that opportunity to be able to survive. And that shows that when you've got trees and vegetation, if you look at depression as dark blue and stress as the orange, 25% more tree cover, and you get less depression, you get less stress. NDVI is a normalized, is a satellite way of looking at vegetation. More green space, less depression, less stress. That's because we're hardwired still. So although we can adapt, we are absolutely hardwired to the actual environment that we were built up and brought up in. So let's have a look then for children. And this is a bit more concerning. So stress increases when you've had lots of stressful events. So you can see on the left-hand side, you've got low stressful events in someone's life, and their psychological stress is up to about 5. In some children, they've got lots of stressful events, and their stress is much higher. But if you look where high nature, which is the light blue, compared to low nature, which is the dark blue, the light blue is considerably less stress, particularly those children that have had lots of stressful events in their life. So those children in deprived communities that have had lots of stressful events, nature heals them much more than it does others. That's incredible, and to think that all it is here is that the connection to nature has actually helped them deal with that chronic stress and that stress they've got. So what's going on? Which Kaplan and the ecologists who came across this were trying to work out what is it in nature that does so much good. And what they found is that when you're concentrating on an Excel spreadsheet, or you're doing your work, or you're reading, or you're doing a crossword, or doing something like that, your front part of your brain is absolutely determined to kind of understand it. And it uses up lots of energy and actually depletes it. So you can only look at an Excel spreadsheet, for those who love Excel spreadsheets, for a certain amount of time before you actually can't see any numbers anymore, because it all just gets into a muddle and you need to go out for a break. And when you go for a break, they tested people after looking at lots of mathematical equations and tests and other things. And they found that some of them went off and went for a walk in nature. Some of them went off and watched television. Some of them went off and read a book. And some of them talked to others. But those who went out to walk in nature, when they came back, they were far more revived. And the reason is that they had involuntary attention, and that means they had fascination. And fascination means you look around in nature, you can be totally absorbed, but it's not using up any energy in your brain. So unlike that focused attention, direct attention as it's called, which uses up a lot of it, involuntary attention means you restore yourself. And that's why the nature restored you so much more quickly than anything else, because it completely was at one with your brain. And your brain didn't have to do any work at all. In fact, it replenished it very, very quickly. So that's one of the reasons that's happening in the brain. So that's why, compared to indoor exercising, if you go and exercise outdoors, you have a greater feeling of revitalization, energy, less tension, confusion, anger, and depression, because your brain is allowed to respond and replenish itself. Reading a book is okay, but it doesn't do it quite Definitely looking at a screen doesn't do it. Talking to people is pretty good. Having a laugh with people definitely is a good revitalization, but the one that wins overall is nature. And this was not just a kind of someone putting their own thoughts together. This was done as a very big study to find out the difference between indoor and outdoor exercise. You get children outdoors and they move. The one way of getting children more active, just get them outdoors. The fascination takes over and they just want to have more and more absorbed. They don't get tired. You know, when they're looking at things, they get more and more invigorated and fascinated. When they come back, their behavior is perfect. They're little angels after going out in the, into nature, because they've got all this rest, and particularly children who've got ADHD, really important how it improves. Now, I'm going to come to something in a minute, but this is something really fascinating. Inside our brains, inside our cells, we've got DNA. And at the end of every DNA strand, and I'll talk about this, it probably should have gone a bit later, there's something called a telomere. And that telomere is the cap of the end of a DNA strand. And it's like a shoelace. End of a shoelace, you've got a little plastic clip, and it stops it from undoing. But every time your cell divides and replenishes itself, and for hemoglobin and red cells, they divide every few days. Skin definitely divides very quickly. That replenishes us, but you always get one replacing another. Every time that cell divides, a little bit of DNA is lost at the end, and that telomere is shortened. The more stress a child has, the more overweight they are, and the more inactive they are, the more those endpoints go faster and shorter more quickly, which means a cell can no longer divide when it gets too short, and therefore it dies off, and that's aging. So if we have long telomeres by the time we get to teenage years, we're going to have a long life. If you have short telomeres when you get to teenage years, you're likely to have a shorter life. Now, you can change it a bit, but not completely. Children in green spaces was associated with long telomeres because they had less stress, they were more active, and that is one of the really deep factors of what was going on in children there. They also had larger parts of the brain that deal with behavior and memory. So the hippocampus is an important part of the brain which does all that behavior. So imagine children at school, if you've got a large hippocampus, you're going to be much better off compared to a child who's got a smaller hippocampus. But we know that physical activity can increase the hippocampus, but green exercise seems to increase it even further because you've got that stressful event reduced. And I think the other thing is you get into much more of the understanding of being outdoors, of this intergenerational play, celebrations, identity of strength. It's almost a language of the child, they call it, that when a child is outdoors, it feels it belongs. It feels it has purpose. They feel they can relate to the outdoors. And up to the age of about 12, children build that relationship. So children who've had no relationship with nature up to the age of 12 will find it very hard to have a relationship with nature in adult life. 11 to 12 seems to be the cutoff point, because then they go on to being sociable with teenagers, and that's completely normal. So we've got a very short window of time from about 4 or 5 to 12 to get children to be engaged. And when they do, they feel totally belonging, which means they can go back again when they're older to go back to nature, to understand it and to recuperate and to get restoration. And children also play so much more when they're outdoors with the materials compared to anything that's bought or anything is anything that's kind of created. So there's a lovely picture I haven't got here of a playground, and children being blown over in a gale, and it's right next door to a brand new playground with all sorts of kind of toys and everything else and playthings and brightly colored things. And there's not a single child in the playground. All the children are on the blown down tree, clambering over it, finding, exploring, etc. And it seemed to be this attraction of children to nature which engages them so much. And if you get an alpine wood versus an outdoor playground, there is absolutely no match on all the mental health benefits, physical activity, and memory and every other method of measuring a child's well-being is considerably higher in an alpine wood. Now, we haven't all got alpine woods available, unfortunately, but it was related, that was the top one, it was related to other things. So outdoor playgrounds, absolutely fine, of course, because you're outdoors and you've still got the weather. But if you can get that natural play, it makes so much more difference. And not only a bit into the unborn child, and birth weight, baby's head size, all in the right direction if you're within 500 meters of green space. Less high blood pressure in the pregnancy, and that was for 300 meters. So the pregnancy and the child, the unborn child, is already benefiting from the mother being connected to nature. And that's obviously a fantastic start for a child before it's even been born. So let's go back again and just understand this a little bit more. We talked about the loneliness, being unsafe and no purpose. That causes chronic stress and poor resilience. That causes negative emotions. Stress hormones come out. That leads to poor sleep, poor diet, inactivity, and even addictions. All of those things are there to protect us, believe it or not. We might think that a poor diet making us overweight is a bad thing. Okay, well, it is in some ways to your health, but as a hunter-gatherer, the last thing you want to do is run out of calories. So that's why when we're stressed, we eat more, because there's an imbalance between ghrelin and leptin. So we not only want to eat more calories, we also don't want to let go of them, so they get stored around the tummy. Inactivity, why on earth would you want to be inactive unless you're looking for food or hunting? So any other superfluous inactivity is cut out, which is why we don't want to go to the gym or go for running when we're really stressed. And sleep, well, we don't want to be deeply asleep when we are in danger. So our sleep becomes much poorer. So all of these were protective in the old days, but unfortunately they become negative. And addictions were ways of actually, you didn't want to have kind of too much rational thinking in your brain. It uses up lots of energy. And also, you don't do a cost-benefit analysis when someone with a spear is about to attack you. You just do an immediate. So all that frontal lobe part disappears, and you just work on instinct. So that we talked about nature outside. What about nature inside? Well, there's a massive ecosystem in our body. It's billions and trillions of cells. They're all bacteria. So we have as many bacterial cells in our body than we have cells of our own. We are 50% bacteria. The other 50% is us. And if you look at it on DNA, there's 10 times more bacterial DNA than there is our own human DNA. So we are utterly reliant on this ecosystem inside us, which we have to feed well. And when we're stressed, unfortunately, that protection of those bacteria start to fall away, and we get what's called a leaky gut syndrome, which means we get chronic inflammation as bits of bacteria start to go into our bloodstream. And that is causing this inflammation, which causes so many things. So yes, in a way, we're an interface between nature on the outside and nature on the inside. One ecosystem on the outside, one ecosystem of billions and trillions of cells on the inside, all as important as each other. So all that inflammation, that comes from the body wanting to get fat and storing it in our tummy. But secondly, we saw that leaky gut where bits of bacteria are going into our bloodstream, and that causes a reaction as the body thinks something's happening. So this is a bit of science which is just quite new and really quite important. That blue bit is your frontal cortex. That does all your thinking. That's your rational thinking. The orange is your amygdala, which is the fear bit. You're going down the street at night, you're walking home late, and a bin bag suddenly flies up in front of you. You freeze, a sudden cold sweat goes over you. That is the amygdala signals saying it hasn't done any interpretation, doesn't know what it's going on. It just knows you've got to protect yourself. Then the frontal cortex takes over within a few milliseconds and say, it's only a bin bag, don't worry. Phew, you say, great, you carry on walking. Now, when you get this inflammation in the body, this chronic inflammation, this undercurrent inflammation, which means your immune system is fighting a little bit against itself because of all this leaky gut and this fat you've got in there and these other things. Your amygdala doesn't talk to your front bit, your frontal cortex, and your frontal cortex doesn't talk to your amygdala. Those synapses get blocked off. So now the amygdala takes over, and you're constantly anxious, you're constantly in fear. And the more you have a bad diet, the more inactive, the more disconnection from nature, the more chronic anxiety starts to develop, because you haven't got that balance in the brain. So these are all things we've identified caused by this chronic stress, chronic inflammation, change in habits, all of those interlinked together. And then we start to change. We start to feel more lonely. We may not be lonely, but the perception of loneliness starts to become bigger. So what you may have thought, okay, I'm on my own for a bit, but I've got every 2 weeks or every week I go down to the social club. In the evenings, I perhaps see my son, and you might be feeling okay. Now you're feeling lonely, even if you're left alone for a few hours, because the perception of loneliness. Green space reduces that. Taking away green space increases it. The perception of health is another thing of chronic anxiety. If you've got chronic anxiety, you have a poor perception of your own health. People who live near nature have a greater perception of good health. In other words, less anxiety. So we've now kind of worked out that there's a huge amount going on. You've got this unsafe feeling if you're disconnected from nature. You're losing your resilience. You've got negative behaviors, poor sleep, poor diet, inactivity. That causes fat and your gut biome. That causes chronic inflammation and the short telomeres and free radicals. And that causes all of those. Oops. Diabetes, heart disease, arthritis, fatigue, aging, you name it, pretty much every single long-term condition in this country is caused by those things on there, the chronic inflammation, short telomeres, which is caused by inactivity and other things, but caused by chronic stress, which is caused by disconnection to nature, loneliness and having no purpose and the negative emotions. They all connect together. Whoever said that the mind and the body are separate? Well, nobody did say that. And if people have thought it, it's so completely wrong, because here we see how they totally interact. And that unsafe bit at the top, where the nature bit can make you feel safe and help you reduce that chronic stress, is where nature really plays its part. And here's the proof. Here's a big example of a study that was done with, I think it was about 1.8 million people. On the left, people living in with the area of little green. On the right, they have a really green area they're living in. And then they divide it into the highest income, the middle income, and the lowest income. So the lowest income are the dark blue graph. The highest income are the light blue graph. So now you can see that the gap between the death rates, and sorry, the left side is all death rates, so it's just called incidence rate. It doesn't sound very nice when you talk about it directly like that, but that is death on the left. So you can see that the people of the highest income have a lowest death rate compared to the people of the lowest income on that left-hand side, little green. Go all the way to the other end, where it's very green, and still the high-income people have a lower death rate and the low-income people have a higher death rate. But look at the gap. It's really shrunk down. If you're wanting to do leveling up, if you're wanting to deal with health inequalities, green space. Lots of green space accessible to people at all times, in all places. That's what you have to do. And that would be the equivalent of putting hundreds of billions of pounds into the NHS, which could never deal with that kind of thing. So that's done in the UK. We mustn't remember blue space. Well, kilometres from the coast feel much happier, less health complaints, etc. So blue space is probably as important. If you look here, sorry about Sheffield not having a beach, but you've got many other things, but if you look at the happiness compared to different places, the coast and marine have an incredible effect on happiness. But so do mountains and woodland and freshwater, suburban less, being indoors really not great, and being in a car really terrible. So you've got this kind of coastal effect of having a big effect. But any water actually seems to be more important than the forest, woodland or countryside. So the canals, the rivers, they all add a little bit more to just surroundings with no nature at all. Well, you're in Sheffield, you've got a great pilot. I'm on the Department of Health on the evaluation group at the moment, the steering group on the Green Social Prescribing pilot. So I'm not going to go into detail because I know that you're probably involved with that quite heavily. But Green Social Prescribing is a brilliant kind of initiative because it's getting doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals of all type to understand that this is serious, that if you actually tell your patients to connect to a green space, either to do conservation work, going for a walk, going for a group of people doing horticultural, doing bird watching, doing anything at all with green space, then there's going to be this huge benefit because the brain changes to being completely feeling safe again, and it therefore reduces the chronic anxiety and the stress. Looking at the playgrounds, here's a child's playground, I think it's near Derby, where they completely take away the asphalt, which was a square, and they put logs and they put sawdust and planted trees. And what they found was bullying was reduced by a significant amount because the creative children took over and the bullying children didn't have any more anything to go by. So they were pushed to the side because all the children wanted to know what the creative children were doing with the small parts and the work on the logs and the picking up sand and bark and things like that. And children were far more attentive when they went back into class as well. And as I said, when we did Beat the Street in Sheffield, we got families out touching these little boxes, which sound a bit strange to start with, but we put those very carefully in all the parks and then did double points if they managed to swipe those cards onto the beat boxes in the parks. So it got families for the first time going outdoors and getting into the parks. And that was all we were trying to do, is to get people back into connecting to their local nature where they are. And that, once it started, you don't need to have the beat boxes anymore, because most of the people we got fantastic feedback was, well, we've managed to get back into the park. We didn't know it existed. We've taken our family there and we're going to carry on doing it. You know, we had no idea it was so close and so lovely. And sometimes the simple things are the things that you don't think about. You think you have to get in the car and go off into the Peak District, but actually on your doorstep, there is nature. There's nature all around. And it is incredibly important that we get anyone who's ill, who is anxious, who's got mental health problems, who's got physical health problems, who've got children, pregnant mothers, everybody connecting to nature is at last being taken seriously. So I'm going to leave it there. Thanks very much, Rebecca. So I don't know if there's any questions at all, but I will be very happy to discuss it, and I can carry on talking forever on this, but I'm not going to, because you'll want to talk about other things. But yes, please, any questions at all, I'd be really happy to take them.
I have one if no one else is going first. So I recently started working as a community garden manager in Woodhouse. And you mentioned the social prescribing. So I'm tasked with getting more people into the garden and into the nature reserve that borders onto it. Is there specific people in specific areas with the green prescribing to get in touch with, or is it just a case of going doctor by doctor kind of thing, or what's the best way?
I think, Rebecca, you might be able to help on that one, actually, because the local wildlife trust, I know, are very much involved with the social prescribing. So I think possibly, is that can I hand that back to you, Rebecca, about specifics?
You can, and I'm actually going to hand that over to Kathy, who knows more about it than me too.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm Kathy Slater, and I'm Engagement Manager at the Wildlife Trust. You're right, William, we are quite involved with the Green Prescribing project locally. So there's a couple of things I'd suggest. The way that you can get people referred to your Green Prescribing activity is through social prescribing link workers. And they are connected with GPs and also connected with Voluntary Action Sheffield as well. There's a Keep People Keeping Well network. So if you get in touch with them, and by all means, email into us and we can put you in touch. We also facilitate a green network where everybody who is involved in delivering green social prescribing can come together and share their experiences, and we can develop best practice together. So you'd be very welcome to get involved in that.
Oh, brilliant, thank you.
And just to emphasize how amazing this is, because I know in Sheffield they're doing amazing work anyway, but generally this money came from Treasury. It didn't come from the Department of Health. It came directly from Treasury to the Department of Health and DEFRA in order to try and pilot social prescribing with green social prescribing. So this is the very heart of the Cabinet Office suddenly realizing the connection to nature is important. And I think, hopefully we can get enough evidence to show them that that money they've invested from the Treasury is good enough to actually put loads more money into it, and it will be ring fenced. So otherwise the NHS gobbles up anything that comes anywhere its place. But I think it's just a mindset. No other country in the world has anything anywhere near, and I've been in touch with a lot of them, of anywhere near the government support for this type of thing. So it's something we should be celebrating, and obviously at Sheffield you're really leading the way.
Thank you so much for that. I think Stephen has got a question. He's got his hand up.
Yes, hello, Dr. Bird. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. I'm actually a consultant cardiologist and a trustee of Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust, and have been a bit involved with the Green Prescribing initiative, but certainly endorse its role in healthcare. Personally, I've also benefited because I've always been very interested in the countryside, and I'm also a keen fisherman, so I get a bit of the green and the blue, I think, to help me cope with my previously very stressful job as an interventional cardiologist. But I do want to ask you a couple of things. How much is the response to all these initiatives dependent on culture? Are there cultural differences between different groups of people? And also, has there been any studies, say comparative studies, of how healthy, as it were, people like, say, Amazonian Indians are, who are exposed to a green world versus city dwellers? So is there a difference between cultures as well as cultural response? And also, I don't want to labor the questions too long, but is there a response dependent on personality type as well?
Yeah, there's some really good questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. It's great that you've been able to put the two together and at least got some respite from by being out fishing, because I think, as you say, fishing definitely creates the blue space and the green space together. It's really important about the culture, and I'm also going to talk about, perhaps at this point, the question that often we get, which probably you said about personality, is that why are some of the farmers so depressed and rate of suicide is very high in rural farming when they're surrounded with the most beautiful countryside you can possibly get. So there's that little, and I'm just going to add that as another question to your other question. So first of all, cultural side. Yes, there is. So there's all sorts of complications. So if you've got first generation coming from other countries where owning a car meant you've escaped poverty, and tarmacking your drive means you don't have to have produce anymore from your garden because you've now moved up one echelon, then particularly within the Asian cultures, there has been an area, when I worked at Natural England, it was a very difficult group to actually get engaged with either walking and cycling, but also connecting to nature. except if it was in the celebration of some of the cultural initiatives where they have big picnics, etc. So there are certain cultural groups where they're really struggling, that the white middle class were totally dominating and the ethnic minorities were very low. And only when they did the interviews, the ethnic minorities said it's just not for us. We don't feel we belong. And they didn't kind of feel that there was sort of something for them there. So I think it's still an area where it's been really kind of debated about how on earth you do get different ethnic minorities to the areas. Parks are probably a bit better and they've certainly improved, but the national parks, certainly there's been a very, very difficult ability to get people in from all ethnic groups. Personality-wise, yes, if an adult has had no connection to nature as a child, they will find there's no need to be in nature. There's no connection, there's no relationship. It's a bit like owning a dog as a child. If you were brought up with dogs, you're not frightened of dogs, and you can go up to a dog and you can stroke it. If you didn't have a dog as a child and a dog comes towards you, you're frightened of it. And nature's very similar. So anyone who's been blessed by having a childhood where they've been immersed in nature up to that age of 12, the cutoff point, will often have pro-environmental behavior and also be very much au fait and very connected to nature to be able to feel that they've got that ability to use it to resolve things. And that's probably as far as I can go from personality wise. And then I think the other area is that kind of different cultures. It's very hard to get the different cultures to kind of understand whether it's purely the connection to nature or whether it's the physical activity and the diet and other things that are impacting. But certainly for areas where they are very close to nature, that feeling of belonging is incredibly strong, even much stronger than we've got. And that sense of belonging is a really positive attribute for mental health. And they don't have that so much. So that I can say is one of the big comparisons. They also, of course, do physical activity, and they also have a much healthier diet than we do, which obviously means that they can now live longer if they can get healthcare as well. So there's some things. So just on the thing about answering my own question about the rural farming, the reason often why rural farmers are finding it harder, even though they're surrounded by nature, is nature's only part of the solution. The loneliness is the other part, and that feeling of purpose and stress if you're in debt is another big thing. So if you've got stress from debt and you feel lonely, then even the positive impact of nature can't override that. It is those three things that have to come together.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really, really fascinating and great questions. We did have another question in the chat from Nikki, who says, why isn't this huge bit of evidence being taken into account by policy managers and planners?
And I think it is slowly. I mean, I've been dealing with two things in my life, which as a doctor, I found really important to understand why nobody was doing it. One was physical activity and promoting it, and the other was nature. And the physical activity now is, from when I started, and people, I remember even the chief medical officer said, going for a walk, it hasn't got anything to do with health. That was back in the late 80s, early 90s. Now, of course, physical activity is mainstream. Sport England and Public Health England, as it was, have absolutely pushed it, and it's really now there. Nature has come up faster. 5 years ago, most doctors and healthcare workers wouldn't have had you'd have a few public health directors who would understand it, but most of the NHS treatment wouldn't have had even no concept of how nature could play a part. With these pilots and with COVID and with climate change and obesity, suddenly there's an awareness that actually we've got to do something else, and nature suddenly has come right up from nowhere. And I'd say the last 3 years has been really exciting. So it's slowly initially, but now more rapidly. So I think it's going to be another 5 to 10 years before it becomes much more embedded in our culture, in the NHS and healthcare, but it is moving at last in that direction.
That's good news. That's really great to hear. We've got another couple of people with their hands up. So Joe, if you'd like to go first. Joe Thompson. Or Jeannie, if you'd like to go.
Yeah, Joe, I don't know why, because you haven't got a mute on, but somehow we can't hear you. Jeannie, do you want to do your question?
Okay, I asked my question. Joe's sorting out his sound. Thank you very much for a really interesting talk, Dr. Bird. Thank you. I just wondered if there was anything in your research, if there's a difference in the reaction of people and how they feel, whether the activities they do on their own, or whether it's a facilitated activity like forest bathing or forest schools or something.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, because, and it probably goes back to personality again, which was mentioned earlier in the other question. We're all very different, and having connection to other people, as we said, is really, really important. So the benefit of being with people is an added benefit, but not for everyone. Some people actually like to be on their own. They prefer to be perhaps a little bit more, sort of doing it on their, particularly if they're coming away from being, quite ill, or they've got mental health problems. It might just take them a little bit of confidence to get back to a crowd of people. But one thing that nature does, and it's been shown to, is it's a much more egalitarian existence when you have lots of people together. Nobody has any pompousness. So there's nobody, you can have a whole group of people, complete chalk and cheese, and everyone is equal. And that is one of the massive benefits that everyone would have noticed if you've gone on a conservation group or you've done a walk outside. There are no barriers anymore to people being felt included. And I think that's one of the huge benefits. So yes, the answer is, if you're ready for it and it's okay, forest bathing, walking groups, conservation groups, working in the gardens together with other people is added benefit. And that benefit is completely unique compared to indoors, where you still got this slight hierarchy of humanity, where we still like to have our badges of who we are and what we do, whereas outdoors, all of that disappears and we're just all equal.
Thank you very much.
I don't know if I can make you hear me, can I?
We can hear you.
Ah, right. I've been trying and nothing happened. I did put something in the chat. I work with several community garden groups, and they have been absolutely fantastic with the groups of people who don't feel at home here or outside, in fact. Because we work with our refugee groups, and we have quite a large and very diverse group of refugees here. I'm in Chesterfield, and we have noticed that particularly women feel much safer for a start and accepted out. That's the only place that some of them ever go, in fact. And also there's a sense of purpose. Yeah. Even if you never actually produce anything, there is a sense of purpose.
I think, it's excellent for refugees, because nature is, it's a common language for all of us. And it is complex about the different relationships between culture. But if you've got to come from another country, because of that equity of people, and you don't feel that you're in this sort of, you don't feel inferior at all, that can actually play a part. It's that cultural, getting them to really understand what they want, growing vegetables as well, if they wanted to do that, and that's what they were doing at home. So I think I totally agree. That is a really great way of bringing some people together from the refugees to build them up. But after that, it gets quite complex about which groups then find that the going outside into the wildlife areas, particularly into the national parks, and those people who do community gardens. And I think it's just listening. It's listening to what people are really wanting, what they're feeling good about, and just listening and respecting what people are wanting, rather than us saying, oh, it's good for you, therefore you should be doing this. So clearly that's what you've done, because you've been really successful in building that. So yeah, that's brilliant, and that's good to hear. Was there anything else you wanted to say on that?
Only that we started with the children.
Brilliant.
We got the children in, and that started them bringing their parents. And what we found was that a lot of people think all refugees agree with each other and are from the same background. And obviously they totally are not. And it's something that people have to learn, really, and that's been really good. We've kind of got different groups integrating, because if we just did some big party indoors, nobody ever got to know each other, because the Syrian group, or the Syrian men, would stand in one place and the Syrian women would stand in another, and the Afghan women would stand somewhere else, and never any of them would meet. Whereas once we get in the garden, particularly when the children are around, it just kind of opens people up a bit.
That's a great lesson. That's a great lesson for us all on that. Thank you.
Well, it wasn't me, it was just how it happened. No,
it is. Use children and go outdoors and listen, and as I say, just to kind of find out what people are really wanting. And in fact, I was talking to one of the people who are working with Michael Gove on the levelling up, and they were saying their biggest mistake that's been made is that people living in deprived communities are all the same. They said, you would not believe how that has been across the last 20 years, that there are a kind of group of people who are completely homogenous, and of course, as you've noted, couldn't be further from the truth. Like
food bank users.
Yeah, exactly.
All a homogenous lump. Right.
Joe,
Thank you. That was really interesting.
Thanks very much. Thanks for your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Joe.
Sorry, I did actually get it working. That was really interesting. Thank you very much, William. I'm a university student, actually. I've gone as a mature student. I'm studying psychology, and my focus has been on nature connection. So I could have done with all those references that you've just given me about 6 months ago.
I think I need your references, probably.
So yeah, that was really really interesting. I suppose my question's on because I'm hoping to go into academia and go into research in understanding this a little bit better. Do you see do you see where the research is going? What the blockage is on kind of the science of, because we're doing neuroscience as well, and I'm really finding that fascinating. So yeah, do you know where it's going? You got any advice on where I should be looking out for?
Well, I've got my personal views. It might be completely different to what the general views are, but so I edited the Oxford Textbook of Nature and Public Health, which is out there, came out in 2018, and we got about 90 researchers from around the world who contributed to all of those chapters, and we were just about getting the main universities, so Harvard, Yale, and others were all coming on board with Nature. In the last 5 years, it's exploded, unbelievable exploded. If we did it again now, we have so many papers and so many universities which have got departments now dedicated to nature connectedness. We'd be completely overwhelmed, and it would struggle to start with. So why this sudden boom? What's happening? Well, I think two things probably. First of all, we've run out of ammunition in the NHS and healthcare. We can just keep throwing lots of more medications at people and it doesn't do much more good, and we can do more operations and that doesn't do much good, and we're struggling to deal with the big problems of obesity and diabetes and mental health. So certainly there needs to be another avenue to exposure, and it seems to be this is one of them. So there's a lot of interest and excitement in that because it fits in with biodiversity, it fits in with climate change, it fits in with obesity, and it fits in with the mental health crisis. So the other thing is that we're getting to the point where we now know there is an association, but we don't know why. So the neuroscience absolutely is going to be a massive place to grow. What is going on between the amygdala and the frontal cortex? What are all these signs? What's happening in there? The whole context of stress and why nature. And is it the green leaves, or is it the shape of the leaves? Is it what is it that makes us actually connect to the nature? What parts of the nature help us? So all of that kind of, nerdy science needs to be done, because that will be really help sell the case, because doctors love to hear about the science and that will help make the case. But the biggest thing is how to get people out there. I think that behavioral change, behavioral science, because for too often it's been, you should go out in nature because it's good for you. and I like nature, and therefore you should like nature because I like it. And that sounds a little bit kind of a little bit passive aggressive, really, but it's actually not far off what we have been doing innocently, very innocently, in saying, look, you must come into nature. It's so good for you. It's so brilliant. Why aren't you doing it? And we haven't really understood where people are starting from. So I think the neuroscience and the behavior science are the two areas which I'd say will be going forward. The fact that nature's good for you, I think we don't need to do very much more on that. It might still different types of nature, etc. But I think the brain and the science, the behavioural, absolutely loads more needs to be done on that. And then you've got, there's another part, which is the building. So how do you build cities where nature is totally embedded in that city, so that it becomes a unit together? You don't have parks in one place and buildings in another. You have parks in buildings and buildings in parks, and the whole thing intersperses. That's the other part of what makes a really good city.
That's really interesting. Thank you very much. Do you know of anyone, any specialists around Sheffield or South Yorkshire that?
Well, Sheffield Hallam. Are you Sheffield or Sheffield University or Sheffield Hallam?
Sheffield University.
Okay, sorry, the other side, Sheffield Hallam.
I live closer to Hallam though, so I'll walk over. Okay,
I could put you in touch. They've got a really good unit there, department there. So I know a couple of there. So I think that pregnancy one was from Sheffield Hallam. So if you go to that reference, you'll find that this will be available, this presentation.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So fascinating. Christopher, have you got a question?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You're fine.
Yeah, all good.
I've always been stimulated by you, William Bird's, when I was a founder member of Natural England, actually. But my question is about change in housing. We've got a government who wants to build 350,000 new houses a year. It's not got there yet. One of the problems with doing that is it's likely to intensify the living inside cities. I'm fortunate in living 5 miles out of the centre of the city, on the edge of the city of Sheffield. I have very good contact with nature. I know that the life expectancy of some people on bus rides 5 or 6 miles away from me can be 8 years less than mine. If in fact the main growth of housing is going to end up happening in cities and big towns, and with greater intensity in the centre of them, and we've got towers being built in Sheffield, we're going to have intensive reorganisations of areas of Sheffield, the likelihood is it could end up squeezing nature out such that it is. Now, to what extent has there been effective engagement with government, maybe Michael Gove's department, at least he thinks more than some people do, about how new building and new cities or extensions of cities are going to be designed in order to improve contact with nature? And that raises a question: how big does nature have to be to make a real difference?
Yeah, it is an important question, the important problem of trying to balance. New housing itself may not be, so much of a problem, but as you say, it's when it's so tightly packed that you've taken out, perhaps even built on some of the green spaces or brownfield sites that were there in the first place, and therefore children haven't got anywhere to play or to roam, or it's become sterile. And there's the other thing where you get gentrified nature, where the nature becomes very much pollarded and mown short, and it loses all its, but people think that is a beautiful place because it looks like a lawn, and you've squeezed nature out, as you say. So there needs to be some real thought and policy and lobbying. The Princess Foundation have done some amazing work on when they've got new housing, and this is big landowners deciding that who's going to build on their land, and therefore having very strict criteria that they follow a very careful, prescribed kind of nature basis to be able to do that. But that's on land which is big landowners have got. But the end result can look absolutely stunning. and the housing is still packed really quite close together. It's still quite small housing, but it's been put with nature embedded everywhere and complete. So you can do it. My worry is, as you say, is that it's going to be forgotten, and the clamber to get housing done, you're going to move nature out. You don't need that much nature for human beings to feel safe. So children can have a small park. You can have one tree, someone sitting outside under a tree, walking to that tree, watching it change the seasons. Even that has a big impact. So you don't need big open spaces, but you do need lots of it, but in smaller parks. And I don't think there's anyone who's really, the Town and Country Planning Association have been doing some work, but I haven't really seen, and I may be slightly out of it, someone coherently lobbying a government to say this has got to change. And I think Michael Gove, as you say, was a really good DEFRA. He did a really good job, and I think he should be, understanding it. But I think it's an area where the Wildlife Trust, if I'm going to put you back to the Wildlife Trust, should be really pushing very, very hard for urban nature and make sure it's not squeezed out. So I'm agreeing with you in a long way.
Brilliant. Does anyone else have any questions? I think I did see another one on the chat, actually.
Becca, can I just come back on that point about the Wildlife Trust lobbying?
Yes, of course you can, Nikki.
Good, I hope you do it.
Wildlife Trust, and we do lobby government about nature. We've got some documents and reports about housing and nature, and respond to all the consultations and everything. But it's very challenging at the minute because of the pressure to build huge numbers of houses, especially in somewhere like Sheffield, where it's so constrained by the geography of the city and also the green belt and various other things. But yeah, we are trying, along with other organisations and Wildlife Countryside Link, to lobby the government on those points.
I think that lobbying, if that can come right through with public health really screaming loudly as well, and to make sure that you've got that united front with the health community, with that evidence of children particularly, that if we want more ADHD, we want more obesity, then we just put closely packed housing. That's what you're going to get, and you're going to get poor mental health. And I think, you just need to get those, get public health right behind you on that, and banging fists on tables to say, look, we can't put up with another generation of children coming through without green space. So every bit of help. So thank goodness you are doing it.
That's a good point, though, because we do tend to form coalitions with other wildlife NGOs, and obviously we reference the health reports, but maybe lobbying with the health people have more impact.
Brilliant.
Great. So there was another question from Heather, who was asking, is there still work going on to educate GPs to realise the potential of prescribing, of green prescribing?
Well, interestingly enough, we've just done some training of GPs in Essex. So I trained up 5 GPs who then trained up all their colleagues to talk about nature and physical. We did a tactic to physical activity, and we are just doing a lot of modules which are going to go under the BMJ. And that's with the Bristol, and I think with the Sheffield. In fact, Duncan has moved to Sheffield, who's one of the GPs who's doing it with me. So that would be an e-learning module on the BMJ website, which when I've done it for physical activity, we've got about 250,000 completions of doctors from around the world, but also healthcare assistants, nurses, physios, everyone. So we're hoping we'll get the same impact. So we're moving forward, and this is really at the accelerating part of getting doctors engaged with nature and understanding it and knowing what the benefits are and how to do it, etc. And I think the best thing is that I'm I just don't do very much general practice now, but there are a lot of new GPs coming on, young GPs who are really chomping at the bit to try to get this amongst their colleagues. So yes, there's a lot going on and it's exciting. And by the way, just on the Greg Fell, by the way, from Sheffield, your Director of Public Health, who I know really well, would be your best champion for housing, and it's his big thing. So if you can just I'm sure you're in touch with him anyway, but yeah, he is an incredible advocate for getting nature and health together.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions?
Rebecca, Sue in the chat has asked, does the Trust check all housing applications locally and lobby local government as well as national? Nikki, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, we do check housing applications and respond on behalf of the Trust to the local authorities. We don't reply to everyone, obviously, but yeah, we do. We, as well as picking up issues around impacts on wildlife, we also pick up issues around connections to wildlife and access to green spaces as well. And also on forward plans, not just when it gets stage of a plan application coming in, but also when they're making the plan for the whole of Sheffield or the whole of Rotherham.
It's really good to hear.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. William Bird. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been fascinating, and I have seen quite a few messages in the chat saying thank you so much. And even though they regularly follow you, they've still learned something new by attending this talk. So that's great. I think it's really inspiring, and I think a lot of people are going to go away inspired to make a difference and carry on doing fantastic things. We do have Kathy in the meeting, who briefly spoke earlier, who was just going to give a really quick 5-minute update about what we're doing at the Trust. If anyone would like to stay on and listen to her just give a brief update, if that's okay.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, and thank you, William. That was, amazingly inspiring. I've got a very short presentation to share with you, if you don't mind bearing with me. I'll just get that up. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Connecting people to nature is a key part of our work. Obviously, we're working to support nature's recovery as well, but we, it's of equal importance, I think, in terms of our strategy as a wildlife trust, particularly, I think, with us being an urban focused trust. So we do a whole range of activities to connect people with nature. Obviously, our nature reserves are freely accessible to everybody to enjoy, and they are spread across the city. So hopefully everybody in Sheffield and Rotherham doesn't live too far from one of our nature reserves. Last year, we engaged over 6,000 people in activities to support them to connect with nature. And interestingly, listening to you talking about how important that connection to nature is for children, over half of those people were children. So that kind of reinforces the importance of that work to me. We specifically have a project in an area of work focused on improving health and well-being for those experiencing, mental ill health and social isolation, called our Wild at Heart project, which has been running for 8 years in Sheffield and Rotherham. And last year we supported 199 people through that project. And we're also involved in the Green Prescribing project that you mentioned as well, William. These are just a few images, captured from our Wild at Heart activities. We run a whole range of different activities so that everybody can feel included and engaged. So some of them are, arts and crafts space, some of them seasonal cooking sometimes, but they're, always outside in nature, and drawing on those kind of 5 pathways to nature connection that are sort of backed in terms of scientific research, looking at your senses and emotional connection and the beauty of nature. This is just a few kind of images of some of the activities that we've run. We have a group running at Clifton Park in Rotherham, which is very well established. and social prescribing link workers there refer people who they feel will benefit from being involved in that group. And the kind of social connections are really key, we find, as well as the connection to nature, as you were referencing, William. And we're just starting a new group in Sheffield. We're very fortunate to have secured lottery funding once again to support this area of work. So we're going to be able to set up a new group in Concord Park in Sheffield, so we'll be taking referrals to that group very soon. And this is just some of the feedback we've had from participants in Wild at Heart. You know, it does seem to really make a difference to people's lives, and particularly through the COVID period, you know, we were still able to do a sort of hybrid delivery of some, you know, digital resources and online sessions when we weren't able to meet face to face. But as soon as we could get out there, we were meeting face to face again. And people told us, you know, how important that was to them, and you know, how it really helped them deal with anxiety and stress during COVID. And then just quickly, just to touch on some of the green social prescribing work that we're involved in, working with the NHS and other voluntary and community sector partners locally in South Yorkshire. So we've been doing some mapping and insight work that looks at, I suppose, draws attention to the issues that you mentioned, William, about that inequality of access to natural green space. So we've done mapping that shows where the natural green space is and where the health inequalities are most extreme, and there is a real mismatch, you know, which really helps us to give, you know, gives priority to our work really, to not only creating a nature recovery network, but a nature connection network, and, you know, easily accessible green space for everybody to benefit from. We've also done training of social prescribing link workers, I suppose similar to the GP training that you were referencing, to get them to understand nature connection and to bring that into their work, and also understand how they might refer you know, people that they're working with onto our activities and other green social prescribing providers. And we also facilitate a green network, as I mentioned before, so that voluntary and community sector partners that are delivering green prescribing can come together and share that expertise, and importantly blue prescribing as well. I mustn't forget the blue, you know, so water-based activities as well, because we have got, you know, rivers and canals, although we haven't got any sea obviously in Sheffield. And then something that we've been doing more recently is Wild Wellbeing Days. So we've been delivering some one-off events for volunteers that supported the NHS through the pandemic, just to give a boost to their well-being and support them in connecting to nature, and hopefully it can take on that and draw on that in the longer term in their lives. And just a couple of plugs, I suppose. If I get the impression that, you know, you're an audience that really understands the value of connecting with nature and to our health, and you probably benefit from that very much yourselves in your own lives. But there is the 30 Days Wild initiative happening at the moment, which the Wildlife Trust are promoting, encouraging everybody to participate in a random act of wildness every day in June. And there's lots of ideas and you know, social media out there sharing those experiences, so do get involved. And just one thing to look out for in the future, to complement our face-to-face groups that we run through Wild at Heart, we will be setting up a sort of digital strand of delivery. So that will be some online sessions and digital resources and ideas of activities and places to visit that everybody can access, so that, you know, anybody who wants to, you know, increase their connection with nature can get involved. So that's just something just to let you all know about. Thank you. I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. That was really great. Thank you for the update. So if anyone's got any questions for Kathy, this is your chance now.
Rebecca, I just want to say thank you so much for having me, and it's been a real pleasure. Been fantastic questions. I always learn a lot when I, you know, listening to people and what they're saying and what they've been doing. And I've got a slight kind of yeah, a sort of soft heart for Sheffield, because we've been working quite a lot with the Beat Street, but also from Sheffield Hallam, I've done work before there, and have been up and down to Shellham. And Greg Fell is my inspiration as well, for being a director of public health who's done such a great job. So yeah, so really pleased. If there's anyone who can get it all together, it's you lot in Sheffield that can actually make that massive difference, because there seems to be a lot of energy there. So thank you.
That's great to hear.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think everyone agrees that it's just been a really great, inspiring evening. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. And thanks for everyone for joining in and asking great questions as well. So thank you very much. And I will make the recording of this available so that you can share it around all your networks and inspire even more people. So brilliant. Thank you so much. And hopefully we'll see you again.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.